The Answer.
Don't forget that you can watch Chicago's Morning Answer on the Income Store live video stream every morning at 560theanswer.com.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And now that you've had 24 hours to digest the particulars of the whistleblower complaint / op-ed, as I would characterize it, has that changed your opinion at all with respect to President Trump and some of the GOP nervous Nellies not looking forward to a trial in the Senate if and when the House moves forward to formally impeach the President of the United States? 312-642-5600, turnkey.pro answer line. 64636DA, turnkey.pro text. I know there's a lot to inform this discussion that began in earnest yesterday with DNI Director, that's redundant, DNI Joseph McGuire testifying before the House Intelligence Committee, which, of course, chose to hold their inquiry in public rather than to make a spectacle, rather than just do it quietly behind closed doors.
And Joseph McGuire served 3 decades as a Navy SEAL. I did not know that. That's impressive.
One response, some observations from a former CIA analyst and NSC official who edited transcripts of POTUS phone calls with foreign leaders. His name is Fred Fleitz. He had a tweeting storm, Twitter thread. His comments: "This is not an intelligence matter. It's a policy matter and a complaint about differences over policy. Presidential phone calls are not an intelligence concern. The fact that the intelligence community officers transcribed these calls does not give the intelligence community's inspector general jurisdiction over these calls." And Joseph McGuire essentially made that point in his testimony yesterday. He goes on, does Fred Fleitz: "It appears that rules restricting access and knowledge of these sensitive calls were breached. The official was not on the call, not on the approved dissemination list, and should not have been briefed on the call. We understand from New York Times reporting that the individual, the whistleblower, is a CIA official who is attached to the White House." That's about the extent of what has been reported by way of identity. Fleitz goes on: "The way this complaint was written suggests the author had a lot of help. I know from my work on the House Intel Committee staff that many whistleblowers go directly to Intel oversight committees. Did this whistleblower first meet with House Intel Committee members? ? It's therefore important that Congress find out where the complaint came from. What did House and Senate Intel Committee Dem members and staff know about it, and when did they help orchestrate this complaint?" That's a really good question, because it calls to mind questions about the orchestration of people coming forward to make accusations against Brett Kavanaugh during the Kavanaugh confirmation saga, you'll recall. Yeah. "My view is that the whistleblower complaint is too convenient and too perfect to come from a typical whistleblower. Were other intelligence community officers involved? Were outside groups opposed to the president involved?" Fred Fleitz asks. "This complaint," he goes on to say, "will further damage intelligence community relations with the White House for many years to come, because IC officers appear to be politicizing presidential phone calls with foreign officials and their access to the president and his activities in the White House. Worst of all, this intelligence community officer, and probably others, have blatantly crossed the line into policy. This violates a core responsibility of intelligence community officers to inform but not make policy. This is such a grievous violation," Fleitz concludes, "grievous violation of trust between the intelligence community and the White House, that it would not surprise me if intelligence community officers are barred from all access to POTUS phone calls with foreign officials." And of course, that doesn't even contemplate, I'm adding now, doesn't even contemplate the chilling effect it'll have on presidential conversations with foreign leaders on going forward. For more on this whole topic area, we're pleased to be joined again by Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, and author of the book, which is already going to need a sequel, Ball of Collusion: The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan, my pleasure.
So how did you interpret the four corners of the complaint in the context of the transcript of the phone call, and with the additional feature of the testimony from DNI McGuire yesterday?
Well, I thought that to me, the complaint is still very secondary because we now have the evidence. And I guess, I know that I guess my main view of it is that we wouldn't be hearing about the process or the complaint if the main grist of the complaint, which is the conversation between Trump and Zelensky, if that were as explosive as it were advertised, they wouldn't be needing to, bring out the complainant and bring out the complaint and see how the complaint described the conversation. You and I now know more about the conversation than the whistleblower did
Right.
when the whistle was blown, right? So, I guess as a former prosecutor, I was frequently in a situation where we got a tip of information, and then once you get the tip of information, then it has served its purpose once you have the actual information, like the actual evidence. And it seems to me that the conversation between the two presidents, I wouldn't call it much ado about nothing, but I think it was greatly overblown. So I don't understand what the whole song and dance is about the complaint. I think it's very interesting that the complaint has some things wrong about the conversation.
Right.
Yes.
And it certainly looks like it's cobbled together in a way that is very suggestive of outside help. And there are now reports about it being very politicized help. We'll have to see where all that goes. But I just don't think the conversation is much of anything. And if the conversation isn't much, I don't see how the complaint helps it.
Well, there's no quid pro quo, but the Democrats seem to be zeroing on how the phone call was placed in a separate electronic file. What do you know about that? Is that just...
Well, first of all, what I looked into this a little bit last night, and what I understand is that when President Trump's conversations with the President of Mexico and the Prime Minister of Australia were leaked by rogue elements of the intelligence community toward the beginning of his administration, they began to take extraordinary measures to protect his conversations with foreign leaders. So this probably was not the first time that was done, and I don't think it was done. They're going to have to go a long way before they prove that it was done in order to conceal this particular call as opposed to other calls that he has. But even if that were true, and I don't think it is, I guess two things occur to me. Number one, given the commentary about Macron and Merkel, that is the kind of stuff that would normally be designated top secret, and there would be very limited distribution of it because the president and another president or another foreign leader's commentary about other foreign leaders is not something we would want to get at. That was why I was so surprised to see this conversation released. I heard that they said that it was okay with Zelensky that it be released. I doubt it was okay with Macron and Merkel, and I doubt it was okay with people in the intelligence community who have to deal with those countries and people in the State Department who do. That's the kind of stuff that gets classified top secret all the time. So I don't really see what the big problem is with treating something that should have been designated top secret as top secret. But, as a legal matter, that would be in the nature, hiding something would be in the nature of consciousness of guilt. Consciousness of guilt evidence is always very good if you have guilt in the first place. That is, if somebody has done something that is prosecution worthy, and then they either lie or take actions to conceal it, then that helps you prove intent at trial. It can be very powerful evidence, but it's a nothing unless you have the underlying crime in the first place.
Well, you
if people are just, I was just going to say, if people stupidly conceal stuff that isn't actually criminal, there's no stupidity crime in the federal code. If it was, we'd have very busy U.S. attorneys' offices.
And you also have the additional wrinkle of the disclosure of the whole thing.
You mean the fact that Trump has put it out?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's I didn't think that was a good idea. I suppose it is a good idea now for Trump's position, because if you don't put it out, then all you would have would be this complainant's version of it. Or even worse, you'd have something like that ridiculous thing that Adam Schiff did at the beginning of
Yes.
the hearing yesterday, which was like, that wouldn't even get into a grade C mobster movie. But if you don't have the actual conversation, you're at the mercy of people who are willing to make it up. So from that standpoint, it's a lot better to have the real thing than nothing. But all you can say about that is it's better in the here and now in connection with this controversy. As far as the long range effect of it, and the fact that now foreign leaders who we want to have communicate with our
Right.
leaders, and who we want to have be able to have sensitive and candid conversations. Would you pick up the phone and
Right.
call an American
Well,
official
I
under
think
these
twice.
circumstances?
I would.
Well,
Yeah.
and boy, it's something, isn't it? Do you ever sit back and say, "Boy, Adam Schiff and I are both officers of the court"? Isn't that interesting? The
Yeah.
the
Well, I sat back yesterday, Dan, and because I've been questioned by that committee. I testified before that committee a couple of months ago. I thought that was peculiar because they wanted me for 3 hours, and Mueller, who wrote the report that I was testifying about, they only wanted him for 2 hours. I thought that was a little
Oh, that's
strange. But
Did he really write the report, though?
well,
yeah, well,
I don't
no,
think he
but I,
rewrote
but
that.
I,
Sorry.
but Amy,
Get some
I
help.
wrote my testimony.
Well,
I
you
want
should
that. I
have.
want that.
good, good. Hey, I wanted to just bottom line this, because you have officers of the court or members of Congress like Adam Schiff, who've already served as a judge, jury, and executioner long ago on this topic, but are doing so again.
Right.
And Judge Napolitano on Fox News got into this back and forth with the Joe DiGenova over whether or not Trump committed and admitted to a crime. From what we know now, what you've seen and read as a former federal prosecutor, is there any crime here? Is there a
No.
statute that can be pointed to that Trump violated?
No, and the thing here that's worth looking at, with due respect to Judge Napolitano, who's a very good guy and a smart guy, but is not an expert on federal criminal laws. Joe DiGenova, who was a longtime U.S. attorney in Washington, is. Amy just mentioned the Mueller report a couple of minutes ago, or whoever wrote it, right?
Right.
They were clearly trying to nail Trump or the people around Trump, right? All you need to do is take the 10 minutes it takes to read their section on the Trump Tower meeting, and you have this group of very aggressive prosecutors who would love to nail Don Trump Jr., I'm sure, but end up writing this legal argument which explains why this trying to obtain opposition research under these circumstances does not trigger the campaign finance laws, because it's not a thing of value.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can say Joe DiGenova, who has done some legal work for the president, is in the president's corner and all that stuff. I would suggest people look at the Mueller report in that section, and you get these prosecutors who really are trying to make the case, and they're saying, look, the campaign finance laws don't apply here because this kind of assistance simply isn't a thing of value. And the other thing I would just add to that is, if you're going to nail a president and we're going to have an impeachment thing, I'm all for impeaching presidents who violate the law. That's okay with me. But it's got to be something other than a campaign finance violation. I mean, campaign finance, it used to be the conservatives' beef with campaign finance, which is still mine, is that they violate the First Amendment.
Yeah.
They're not even something that we treat as a crime all the time. Very often, the Justice Department just refers it to the FEC for an administrative fine, as they did with the Obama 2008 campaign, which committed about $2 million worth of campaign finance violations. So you want to impeach the president over a crime? That's cool with me if you find a crime, but find me a crime. Don't be bringing me a campaign finance violation. My God.
What do you make of Trump, though, attacking the whistleblower sources? I mean, he alluded, to punishment for spies. It was caught yesterday. He was in a group in front of about 50 people. Do you think he was
Yeah.
just not
Look, I
taking
think
it
sometimes
seriously, or is he was trying to be lighthearted, or
I think Trump tries every now and then. It tries to be funny very often, and very often he is funny, and sometimes he's reprehensible. And yesterday was in the reprehensible category. And I say this as somebody who was sympathetic to Trump, in that I can't stand these brave progressive public servants hiding behind these laws and all this anonymity. I think they ought to find out who this is and who these other people are. According to this, it's people in the White House staff. But the president, I think, too frequently conflates himself with the country, such that reporting on his activities is somehow treasonous. And the thing I think he needs to bear in mind is that what we all have to have loyalty to is the United States and the Constitution. The president's a politician, and he's got to run against other politicians, and people are going to say nasty things about him. And it's too bad that for his presidency, you have the organized intelligence community trying to undermine the presidency from before day one. And they absolutely should go to the mat and try to figure out who the leakers are. And if they can find them, they should prosecute them. But to suggest that people who are opposed to the president are spies, and that maybe we ought to treat them like we used to treat spies, wink, wink. I wrote a column earlier this week about this incredibly stupid thing Bill Weld said about how,
execution.
That Trump had committed treason, and the only penalty for treason is death, which is not true. But I mean, just to say it was just beyond idiotic. It's not any better when the president does that stuff.
No, I agree. I mean, look, and it's one of these things now after the last 3 years, everybody should just stop using treason because it's being rendered, it's like racism. It's being rendered meaningless through overuse and misapplication.
Yeah, I'm waiting for someone to use it correctly.
He's Andy McCarthy, former chief assistant U.S. attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, and you got to pick up his book, Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency, and I assume he's already busily working on Volume 2. Andy, thanks for
I'm waiting for you guys to give me the Temptation song to go with it.
There you go. There you go. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Take
and
care.
he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper.